So let's consider non-chord tones visually, and then musically. I will play some after I explain what they are. And we're going back to the keyboard again to take a look at C major. Now, what I have here is the musical alphabet, which, as you can see, repeats itself after G. And then I've singled out the letter names of the elements of the C chord, C, E, and G. And up here on the keyboard, you can see where they are in relation to the black keys and the white keys. Of course, C major is going to be made of white keys and nothing else, because the constituent notes are C, E, and G. Now, everything else surrounding C, E, and G are non-chord tones, and all of them are used at one time or another. What I'm going to do is, first of all, just play a few for you so you can hear how they sound, and then take a look at some songs that use them in particular ways. By learning how they sound in actual songs, I think I can communicate to you the value and the proper way to use them. Now, first of all, there's a broad classification of non-chord tones into what are called diatonic and chromatic tones. The diatonic tones are part of the scale that the chord belongs to. So if C is the tonic chord, then the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C will be diatonic. Here's a... And now let's listen to the sound of the non-chord tones next to each of the chord tones. Diatonic non-chord tones. There's C. There's a tone above it, a scale tone above it, and a scale tone below it. Now that tone above it might function as a transitional tone between two chord tones, in which case you call it a passing tone. Okay, let's look at G. There's a scale note above it, and there's a scale note below it. And those both would be diatonic non-chord tones. And then finally, let's see, there's an E, and there's a scale note above it and a scale note below it. And notice how the scale note above it, being only a half step away, 1 fret, pulls very strongly towards that tone. And the same is true of the lower neighbor to the tonic, which is only a half step away. It wants to pull upward to the tonic. Okay, now let's talk about the chromatic tones. The note C has a note 1 fret above it, which might be used as a transition tone to the second tone of the scale. And it has a tone a half step below it, but that's part of the scale. So let's look at the next one that's below it. This B flat is strongly suggestive of a change of keys. That lower B flat, is frequently used in the blues. It's called a blue note. Okay, let's go on to this G again. Now between G and the next scale tone there's an in-between note, a G sharp, or looking at it a different way, A flat. And then with the E, There is a D sharp below it, which is not part of the scale again. This is a chromatic neighbor. And above it there is a scale tone F, but just above the F is an F sharp, which leans very strongly. It becomes a kind of an artificial leading tone towards the G. Okay, so F sharp is a chromatic non-chord tone, a chromatic neighbor tone. D sharp, which doesn't belong to the scale, D does, D sharp does not, is a chromatic neighbor. And finally, now we're back to C again. So we've covered the chromatic and the diatonic neighboring tones to the chord tones, and had a real quick taste of how they might function in musical passage. Let's go right on into some actual applications of power tones. Okay, onward to a song called Gentle on My Mind by John Hartford, and popularized by John Hartford and Glenn Campbell. Now, it's very interesting that the first 12 notes in this song are one note, G. And when you think of an inspired melody, you don't often think of repeating notes. But as we'll see when I add the chords, the chords can change and give this tone some of the characteristics of a power tone, a non-chord tone. In point of fact, that G is always a part of the accompanying chord, which is a C major 7, C6. But the motion of the chord motion keeps changing its character. Okay, so here's the melody. And now I'll play it with the chords accompanying it. The next song introduces a non-chord tone that is much more striking than the repeated note G in Gentle on My Mind, and yet it too is a repeated note. The chord changes underneath it and changes it into a dissonant note, a power tone.